and welcome back to yet another episode of Ball with Y'all. Today is April 13th, and normally you'd be hearing our theme song right about now, but before we get into the meat of our show, I want to take a moment to acknowledge something that happened just a few days ago. You are likely familiar, of course, that the college football world and the NFL world lost a pretty prominent figure this past Saturday in the form of Dwayne Haskins. Of course, Dwayne Haskins was a former Ohio State standout. He was, I think, third place in the Heisman voting in 2018. He broke Ohio State records across the board. So when a guy like him is lost due to a tragic accident down here in South Florida, it's something that strikes us to our core. Now, I know that you're probably not an Ohio State fan, much like myself. And to that extent, normally we don't necessarily like their players a whole lot. But I would be remiss to say that he wasn't a great player, because he was a great player. And honestly, very rarely will I ever admit to being afraid of playing a young man. I was always afraid that my team would play him, and luckily they never did, but I have a feeling they might have lost. But Dwayne Haskins was an incredible talent at Ohio State, broke so many records. And what was really remarkable about him at Ohio State, you think about all the other guys before him, Braxton Miller, Cardale Jones, J.T. Barrett. There were numerous incredible quarterbacks for Ohio State, but really, Dwayne Haskins changed the game for Ohio State. And in some ways, I would say he also changed the direction of our sport as well, as far as the offense-heavy nature of what we are seeing today. So before we get into the meat of our show, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the life of a young man that was lost way too early. One of my best friends is from the area where Haskins was from as well, up in Maryland. She was born in 1997. He was born in 1997. It's something that just jars you to your core. And I'm at a loss for words. So before we get into our show, I want to take 7 seconds for the number jersey that Dwayne Haskins wore at Ohio State in silence to remember the young man, Dwayne Haskins. And we are off with another episode here of Ball with Y'all. Thank you for joining us here on April 13th. We are flying through the month of April. We are already almost halfway through the month, and it's pretty incredible. I feel like we just finished March Madness, which we did, of course, but now we are well into the swing of things. We've got some spring games across the board right now. We just saw Auburn and Clemson and Florida State and Kentucky and a few other programs play this past Saturday. We've got a few more games this coming weekend as well. We are into the meat of the NASCAR schedule as well. A lot of fun things happening there. And we just came off the Masters, which gave us a few different headlines there. Tiger played, finished, which was really cool to see for those of us who support Tiger Woods. And then, of course, we are just a few days away from the return of the USFL. So a loaded weekend here in the next few days. And then also we're coming off of a pretty wild weekend over the past few days as well. So without further ado, let's get into story number one. On Saturday, now normally I would say on Sunday, but on Saturday we had a pretty incredible race, right? We got to see William Byron go out there and win for the second time this year. And I say it was incredible not because the race itself was incredible. It was not an incredible race from a substantial standpoint, but I love the idea of a Saturday night race. I had my whole Sunday to do whatever I wanted to do. I loved it so much. I love Saturday races. I would like to see every race become a Saturday race. I know that's not feasible, but I love the idea of a Saturday race. It's almost like a Thursday night football, right? It throws us off our cycle, and we get an incredible product, or what could be an incredible product, on a random day of the week. And in this case, it was Saturday night. Of course, William Byron, he won with relative ease at Martinsville. Chase Elliott, he led the first two stages, won the first two stages. I was so excited watching that race because I was convinced that Chase Elliott was going to win the race. I was so excited. I thought, okay, this is our moment. This is going to be the moment where he's going to go out there and win at an oval for the first time in 35 races or so. And, of course, one bad pit stop toward the end, and he falls outside of the top 10. I think he ended up finishing 10th, but overall, not a good finish for the 9 team. But it was a really cool story for William Byron, of course. He, I guess it was about a year ago around this time, was when his mom had the mini stroke, and then they found the brain tumor, and It just did not seem to be a good situation for his mother, of course. Now she has a full, clean bill of health, and she was at the race this past Saturday, was able to celebrate alongside her son. Such a cool moment for the Byron family there. Like I mentioned, we saw Chase Elliott do great in the race early on. You saw Ryan Blaney come on toward the end. Somehow Chase Elliott did squeak out a little bit as far as the points lead goes, so Chase is now your standalone points leader, but we'll see how that shakes out over the next few weeks. It was a relatively clean race. You only saw 4 cautions, 2 of those being stage break cautions, and that's something we normally would see a lot more of at Martinsville just because of the nature of the race. But again, part of the problem was with it being a night race, it was already a little cooler up in that April weather. I believe it was around 40, 30 degrees, somewhere in that ballpark. And so with it being cooler, you're not going to see nearly as much rubber on the track. And when you don't have nearly as much rubber getting on the track from the tires, then the racing does not become all that exciting either. So there wasn't a whole lot of passing. You saw a lot of negative social media commentary as a result, and I completely understand because we started off with some pretty strong races with Daytona and then some exciting finishes at Fontana and Las Vegas and Phoenix. And now we're starting to get into some races that aren't really all that exciting with Richmond 2 weeks ago. And then, of course, this past weekend in the form of Martinsville. I would imagine the Bristol road course the Bristol dirt race this coming Sunday will be a little bit more exciting. We'll see how that unfolds. And, of course, we got Talladega the week after. So we should start to see a little bit more of some exciting races here in the near future. But if anything, what we're learning right now is the new package that they have with these NASCAR cars, or these next-gen cars, they're not conducive to short track racing. With the Richmonds of the world, with the Martinsvilles of the world, with how small these tracks are, with how tight these tracks are, with how little banking they have, it's not conducive. And of course, they can make changes, but and honestly, in some ways, it's good to see that they can make changes as early as they have, or as much time as they have to make those changes, because keep in mind, Martinsville is one of the final races in the playoffs. So it's important that we take opportunities like this to identify areas where we need to make changes and make those changes well in advance, right? And ultimately, I kind of think that our main takeaway coming out of this race is that, obviously they need to fix the whole short track racing. That's neither here nor there. Let's put that to bed. We get it. We know that needs to be fixed. But honestly, I'm beginning to wonder, is William Byron our favorite to win the championship this year? It feels pretty obvious. Of course, he's the first 2-time winner this year. He has 4 top 5s in 8 races. He has led almost 400 laps this year. Far and away the best driver so far this year. Only 8 races in, so not necessarily the best indicator, but a strong start nonetheless. But if not William Byron, who could be our front runner as far as the championship goes? I think you look at Ross Chastain, right? Chastain so far, he has a top 5 in all but one of the last 6 races. He's incredibly hot right now. We saw him get hot. Of course, he won COTA. We saw him get hot, I believe, at Las Vegas and at Phoenix. So he has had some strong finishes as a result as of late. And honestly, I would say if it's not Byron, if it's not Chastain, it seems pretty safe to say that you're probably going to see a Chevy win this year. Of course, you could see a lot change here over the next 29 races or so. So there's a lot that could unfold, 28 more races. There's a lot that could unfold this year, but it seems safe to say that Chevy has really unlocked something with this new car, and it should likely unfold their direction here in the next few weeks. Now, as far as next week, looking at Bristol, not really next week, it's in a few days, looking at Bristol. It's not just Bristol, it's a dirt race at Bristol. Of course, we saw the dirt race get brought back last year. Last year's race, of course, if you recall, got postponed a couple different times due to rain, so ended up getting pushed to, I believe, that Monday due to mud and some rain and all that stuff. Joey Logano won the race, but it wasn't really all that exciting. You saw them actually change the format mid-race where they had to restart. All the restarts were single file, which isn't fun at all. Hopefully, we get to avoid the rain this Sunday. I saw there's some reports that we might get some rain, and if that's the case, here we go again with the Monday race. I'd like to avoid that if possible, but let's say that we get a Sunday race. Who has done well here historically? Now, again, there's 2 different buckets we're looking at. You're looking at the Bristol numbers, who's done well here at the Bristol track on concrete, and then who has done well here at Bristol most recently on dirt. Well, interestingly enough, of active drivers, the guy who has the top average finish Among those active drivers is Eric Jones driving the 43. His average finish is 12th in 9 races, including 4 top 5s at Bristol. Followed by Kyle Busch. He's got an average finish of 13th in 32 races, including 8 wins and 14 top 5s. Kevin Harvick, he's got an average finish of 13th in 41 races, including 3 wins and 14 top 5s. And lastly, Denny Hamlin, his average finish is 14th in 31 races, including 2 wins and 9 top 5s. But again, those numbers may not mean a whole lot. I mean, Eric Jones has done very well here at this track, but will he do very well on the dirt? Last year, he finished, I believe, 9th on the dirt here at Bristol. So he could see success here as well, but some of those concrete numbers don't really mean as much. I mean, it's kind of a crapshoot in some ways. As far as last year's top 10, it was a little bit of a mixed bag. We saw Joey Logano and then Ricky Stenhouse Jr., which was a little random. Denny Hamlin, Suarez was up there. Ryan Newman, who no longer races, was up there. William Byron, Tyler Reddick, Blaney, Eric Jones in 9th, and then also Chase Elliott wrapping up the top 10. Of course, we saw Kyle Larson get wrecked. We saw Christopher Bell get wrecked in that race last year. So I don't really know that it's hard to pick this week. We know who some of the favorites could be. We know who's done well here at this track, but again, it's all over the place. It's going to be a mixed bag most likely. We'll probably see the same deal this coming Sunday. But ultimately, I think that we will see a familiar face in victory lane come Sunday night. I like Kyle Larson. He's an accomplished road or dirt course racer, and I think he could very easily do the same here as well. I'll take him to get back on track, well, pun intended, this week, winning the Bristol Dirt Race. I like Kyle Larson to come back and get his 2nd win of the year this coming Sunday. On to story number 2. We are only, I guess, at this point in time, 3 days away from the return of the USFL. Now, what does that mean to you? If you're on the younger side, it may not mean anything to you. If you're a little bit older, you might remember the initial USFL that was back in the early to mid 80s. That's making its return after more than 35 years away from televisions and fields near you. So it's really cool to see. We've got 8 teams in the league here. We got 4 teams in the north and 4 teams in the south. They'll play in division 2 times. So you see New Orleans and Birmingham play against each other twice, and then also Birmingham will play against New Jersey and Philadelphia and Michigan and one other team in the north only once, and then vice versa. The north will play everybody 2 times in the division and then only 1 time down on the south side. They recently held their draft, and you saw a lot of big names get drafted up there, a lot of SEC ties as well in that draft class, so pretty cool to see there. Again, these aren't necessarily guys who had long NFL careers or were standout SEC guys. There are a couple of names that you'll recognize if you're, just a standard SEC fan, but you're not really going to see a ton of top talent like you may have seen in, for example, the XFL and the AAF at one point in time with Johnny Manziel out there and a few other prominent quarterbacks. I think Aaron Murray may have played down there in one of those leagues as well. So it's going to be an interesting time, to say the least, because again, some of these names will resonate for you because you'll remember them from maybe even your own team. But also, this will be a great opportunity to see some guys that maybe we wouldn't have seen otherwise. And also, I think it's safe to say we're all looking for some football right now. So the USFL filling this gap in our lives with no football, with no college basketball, you couldn't ask for anything better, right? What are some differences here that you'll see throughout the year? Well, the extra points are a little bit different. And I think we saw this in the most recent edition of the XFL as well. So, of course, following the NFL model, you can kick off, or after you score a touchdown, you can kick the extra point from the 15-yard line and get 1 point. That's pretty standard for the NFL. They're kicking about 33-yard field goals for an extra point. For 1 point, that's basically what's happening here in the USFL. You can go for 2 from the 2-yard line, much like you see in the NFL and in college football. Pretty standard there. You can go for 2 from the 2, and if you get it, cool. Outstanding. Lastly, though, you can go for 3 if you score a touchdown, right, you can go for 3 and go for it from the 10-yard line. And so all of a sudden, a one-possession game can be as high as 9 points, right? And that's a game changer because oftentimes as college football fans, as NFL fans, we think of it pretty much in sevens, right? So, okay, a 2-score game is 14 points, or as high as 16 if you go for 2 on both of them and you get both of them. But now a 2-score game could be as high as 18, right? A 3-score game could be as high as 27 compared to 24 or 21, depending on how you look at it and how your team proceeds to take after those 2-point conversions and so on. So pretty interesting decision there, and I think it'll give a lot more flexibility to some of those scores, right? So you'll see a lot more unique random scores, some teams that just like to go for 2 just because they can, go for 3 just because they can, and some other teams that miss the extra point straight out because the kickers aren't that good. So we'll see how that all unfolds, and also how those decisions are made based on the quality of the kickers on those teams. If the coach doesn't believe that his guy can make a 33-yard field goal from the right hash or the left hash, wherever it is, maybe he goes for 2 every single time. Maybe he goes for 3 just because, why not? If I'm not going to get any points, might as well try for 3, right? And also, of course, that duplicates also for field goal attempts. So there's a lot of flexibility there from a scoring standpoint. As far as kickoffs, they are taking place from the 25-yard line, which is a little bit longer away than what you would typically see at the NFL level and in the college level. I believe the NFL is either the 40 or the 35-yard line. College, I believe, is the 35-yard line. So that's a slight difference there. So you're probably not going to see near as many touchbacks, which would tend to mean you'll probably see a few more injuries on kickoffs as well, because that was part of the reason of pushing that line back so that you see more touchbacks and as a result fewer returns, which as a result means fewer injuries and also concussions. As far as the kickoff goes, there are a couple options as far as onside kick attempts. Now, of course, you can go with the standard onside kick of kicking it from your 25-yard line. If it goes 10 yards, you can get after the ball and cover it up, and great, you get the ball wherever it was downed. Or, under this new model, you can go for it 4th and 12 from your own 33-yard line. If you convert, you get to keep the ball. You have to go 12 yards. If you get it, cool, keep going, moving forward. If you don't get it, if you only get 9 yards, you can turn the ball over right where that 9-yard gain would be, which in this case would be at the 42-yard line, your own 42-yard line. If you don't get a single yard, if it's an incomplete pass, well, the opponent gets the ball at your own 33-yard line. So it's very much playing with fire. And again, you either convert or you don't. And if you don't, the ball is turned over right where the ball was down. So it's one of those things where you think of like a Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss. He might take the odds on that, probably 9 times out of 10. But it'll be interesting to see how much of these coaches are risk takers at this level and at this stage of the league in its early infancy. As far as overtime, so it largely mirrors the college football model with the 2-point conversions, but they don't even go to the whole 25-yard line and then you get through a couple different periods and then you get to the third overtime. No, they just start straight out 2-point conversion attempts. And from my understanding, you get 3 different attempts for both teams. And after those 3 attempts, whoever has the most points wins the game. Done. Game over. But if they're still tied, then they go to sudden death, 2-point attempts, until there's a clear winner. So you won't see any ties here like you might see in some other sports like the NFL. Nope, you're eventually going to get a winner. And they'll do it through those 2-point conversion attempts. And I just talked about a week ago how I preferred the college football overtime rules as far as those 2-point attempts go. So this could not be any more perfect for those of us that like that layout. And then, of course, there are also 2 forward passes allowed behind the line of scrimmage, which is only something that you see. I think I've only seen it in video games. Honestly, I don't think I've seen it maybe in Canadian football. That might be somewhere where you might see it behind the line of scrimmage. 2 forward passes, which opens up the playbook. You can a lot more trick plays. You'll probably see that a lot more frequently. Some of these coaches that have been around for a little bit that are offensive guys, like a Todd Haley for Tampa Bay, you're probably going to see them pull some random tricks out of their hat because now they can do it. Because you can have the quarterback throw a forward pass and then the wide receiver throw a forward pass back to the quarterback and then the quarterback chucks it the other way. Like there's a lot more flexibility in there now as a result of the freedom that these rules have created. So really benefits the offense there. And there are a couple rules here that benefit the defense as well, but those are a little bit more up our alley as football fans, not really too far from our standard, if you will. So those should be interesting to say the least. And honestly, I'm really excited about that extra point rule. Interested to see how many teams go for it from the 10-yard line for 3 points, and to that extent, how often they succeed as well. I feel like we saw that in the XFL not too long ago, but I'm not quite sure how well that worked out for them. So we'll see if this one cooperates nearly as well. As far as teams to look for, like I mentioned, there are a number of teams out there that have a number of SEC guys, right? And since most of our audience here is in the SEC footprint, I'm going to choose to talk about mostly, exclusively, the South teams, right? I'm not going to talk about the New Jersey Generals and the Philadelphia, was it Storm or Stars, one of those two, and Michigan. I forget what the fourth team is, Pittsburgh, I believe. I'm not going to focus so much on those North teams because really you probably don't care a whole lot. As far as the South teams, there are 4 South teams. There's the New Orleans Breakers, I believe, the Birmingham Stallions, the Tampa Bay Bandits, and then also a team out in Houston as well. So mainly in our SEC footprint. Of course, they're all technically in the SEC footprint, but I'm mostly looking at New Orleans, Tampa Bay, and Birmingham. Personally, I will be rooting for the Birmingham Stallions. That kind of goes without saying, but I do have to admit it. Their head coach is Skip Holtz, the son of legendary coach Lou Holtz. Of course, their quarterback is Alec McGough, former FIU quarterback. They have a ton of speed and talent at wide receiver, so you'll probably see that offense be pretty high-flying. They also drafted a guy that you'll probably remember from the mid-2010s, just wrecking havoc on Oregon's pass attack and run attack in the form of University of Arizona, Wildcat defensive lineman and linebacker, depending on the formation that he was in, Scooby Wright. And Scooby Wright is a fan favorite, so he'll probably be in the backfield a lot for the opposing offenses, so watch out for him this season. Also, the Tampa Bay Bandits. I'm seeing a lot of hype behind them, mostly behind their quarterback. Now, of course, they have the head coach, Todd Haley, former longtime assistant in the NFL on the offensive side of the ball. Their quarterback, though, for the Tampa Bay Bandits, Jordan Ta'amu, which, if you're an Ole Miss football fan, you know Jordan Ta'amu quite well. In fact, if you're an SEC West fan, you probably are familiar with that name. That's a name that does not escape us at all because he did some pretty incredible things for Ole Miss. He, I believe, played with A.J. Brown for a little bit. I want to say he was after Chad Kelly in the mid to late 2010s. So Jordan Ta'amu, a household name for those of us in the SEC. He should figure to do well here. I'm pretty sure he was, I want to say he was the number 1 overall draft pick, if not one of the first few. B.J. Emmons, who was a former Alabama running back and then also ended up transferring to FAU. He's in the backfield for Tampa Bay alongside a couple other guys, so he figures to do well as well. And also on the defensive side, Mekhi Brown, which if you're an Alabama fan, you remember Mekhi Brown, but for all the wrong reasons. If you don't remember, Mekhi Brown was on the sideline of the national championship game against Georgia in January 2018 for the 2017 season. And he had a sideline outburst, tried to attack one of the coaches, if not also Coach Saban, and quickly transferred away to Texas State and never to be seen again. And now Mekhi Brown is playing in the USFL. So great to see that he has resurrected his career in some way, shape, or form. Now, I don't know how this spring league is going to go, honestly, because you look at the AAF and you look at the XFL, both leagues that fizzled out pretty quickly. Just weeks after they got started back, fizzled out pretty quickly. And normally these spring leagues don't work out too well. So hopefully we see the USFL last for a good amount of time. I think it's a good model. I think it's got some unique elements that'll keep us entertained. And honestly, like I mentioned, as football fans, we're a little starved right now. And it'll be really cool to see these guys go out there and try to make something of themselves. And maybe, you never know, they might have the opportunity to progress to the NFL if this all works out for them. But I think we just got to give it a little bit of time here. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but this could be a great opportunity both for the league itself, but also for the players as well. But like I mentioned, watch out for the Tampa Bay Bandits and a little bit of a dark horse, the Birmingham Stallions, this coming season in the USFL. Of course, the first game is this coming Saturday, I believe, between the Birmingham Stallions and the New Jersey Generals. A big opportunity for both programs, for both teams, to get off the schneid and start their seasons with a win. So I look forward to that season starting off just a few days away. On to story number 3. I think it's time that we acknowledge spring games for what they are and what they aren't. I know that spring games, almost in their essence, were created with us in mind, with fans in mind. Coaches don't really like spring games a whole lot. They're glorified scrimmages that aren't even that good of scrimmages. They're kind of made just for our benefit to say, oh, we got spring games, cool, great, outstanding. There's a lot of spring games happening right now. I mentioned it earlier. We saw Auburn this past week. I saw Clemson, Florida State, Kentucky. I don't know if you saw Auburn's attendance this past Saturday for their spring game. It was horrid, and hopefully that's not a sign of things to come for Auburn's football program, but abysmal. There were like 10 people in the stands for Auburn's game for what they're calling the A-Day, which Alabama also calls their game the A-Day, but I'm not going there. Florida plays tomorrow night, Thursday night. You got Arkansas, Mississippi State, Georgia, Vanderbilt, and Alabama playing this Saturday, and South Carolina. I apologize. We have a few more. I think Ole Miss is later in the month. I want to say A&M might be later in the month as well. So, it's easy to get excited for these games. We are, like I mentioned, football-starved fans. We don't have much to watch right now if you don't like baseball, if you don't really agree with what the NBA, the position the NBA has put you in, because suffice to say, I'm not a big fan of the NBA right now as it stands. So any games are better than nothing. It's why most of us are so excited for the USFL here in a few days, because, again, we are starved for football. The last football game most of us watched was back on February 13th between the Rams and the Bengals. And as soon as that game went final, we all had a little bit of a moment of depression, because we're like, okay, well, what's my next game that I get to enjoy from a football standpoint? And here we are trying to get the most out of these spring games. But I think, despite us being so starved for football, it's important that we not jump to conclusions based on what we see. And I know that kind of might seem commonsensical, but I think it's important to remind us of the position we are in currently. These games are not a great predictor of what is to come. They are not a great predictor of talent and how that will matriculate at the next level. How many times have you seen a guy go out there and just stand out in your spring game, only to never meet those expectations later on in their career, or be MIA in the fall entirely? Conversely, how often do we see a guy that we know is really good just not really do much in their spring game? I'm reminded of, I think it was after his all-SEC freshman campaign, Jalen Hurts goes out there and he didn't do a whole lot in the spring game. And then this dude named Tua Tagovailoa went out there and outperformed him, and everybody was like, what is this all about? But even Tua wasn't all that exciting at that point. Just Jalen was flat, right? Of course, ended up that somewhat was a bit of an omen of what would come, but ultimately speaking, at that point in time, we had no reason to think that Jalen was bad just based on that spring game. And Jalen wasn't bad. It was just he was facing up against a better guy in the form of Tua. And we didn't even know that at that point in time either. So, again, these games they're not a good indicator of what is to come. And it's kind of important for us to remember that. The most recent case of this, of course, is Agiye Hall, which was a former member of the Crimson Tide. You might recall back in the fall, it was the same episode as when I talked about Ole Miss and the golf ball incident at Tennessee's football stadium, Neyland Stadium. And I talked about Agiye Hall complaining about the reps that he was getting. He said he wasn't getting targeted enough. And I sat here and I talked about getting replaced easily and how feasible that is, and it's not really a big deal, and that everybody's replaceable. And Agiye Hall, he didn't really get a whole lot of opportunities until late in the season when John Mechie goes down due to injury, and when Jamison Williams goes down due to injury, Agiye Hall has his moment in the national championship game and drops pass after pass after pass, including one touchdown, just does not perform to the level that you would expect, right? And then over the past few weeks, you begin to hear that, maybe these young guys like Jacoby, I forget his last name, Ja'Cory Brooks for Alabama, and of course our friend Agiye Hall and a couple other guys, they're going to stand out. They're going to be these second-year guys that are going to really rise to the occasion, even though they didn't really do it toward the end of the season when Jamison Williams and John Mechie went out due to injury. And then you start to hear that Saban's a little displeased. And then, for whatever reason, a week ago, we hear that it's been revealed Agiye Hall had been suspended from team activities. Okay, a little bizarre, but maybe he's got some academic things going on. We heard about that earlier in the season when he was suspended, I think, before the Tennessee game because of academic reasons. And then the next day, we find out that Agiye Hall was transferring. So less than a year removed from him standing out in the spring game, making some ridiculous catches on the sideline, and just kind of looking like a beautiful plug and play in the form of, trying to replace Devontae Smith. Well, this incredible 5-star guy is coming in here as a freshman to replace a guy that was a Heisman candidate and Heisman winner in the form of Devontae Smith. Beautiful fix, but Agiye Hall did not live up to the expectations. So he's walked away in 2021. He walked away from an incredible spring game with so much hype, but ultimately he has nothing to show for it. And that's not the first time we've seen that before. I'm reminded of Joey Gatewood for Auburn and a number of other guys throughout the years where we thought we knew something, and then we watched the game, didn't really know a whole lot, and then we actually saw them in the fall, and we knew nothing. Conversely, there are a number of times where we see a guy stand out in the first or second game of the year, and they actually become a prominent player that year. But then, usually the same guys that we saw in the spring game don't often stand out later that year. Sometimes there are rare exceptions. Eli Ricks and some of those other guys out there not Eli Ricks, Derek Stingley Jr. for LSU. There have been moments, right? But it's important to know that, yes, some of these guys will impress and ultimately live up to the hype, but not always. And these spring games are not exactly real life. I always talk about how Twitter isn't real life, that I say that 90% of the content comes from 10% of the users, right? It's kind of like this fake world created by this small minority that doesn't really matter, that has this, they all have the same opinions and say the same things and just kind of shove content down your throat. Same idea. This is not real life. The spring games are great, right? They give us an entertaining product that the coaches don't even care for, but they're there and they exist. But again, ultimately speaking, these games are just, at best, a developmental tool for these players and for the coaches to just see who might do well when it comes to nationally televised games, which even these games in some cases aren't nationally televised. Some cases they're streamed, like Kentucky's game was streamed for whatever reason. At best, they're developmental tools. They are not tangible data points. And I think sometimes we kind of get wrapped up in the excitement of these spring games and the football-starved mindset, thinking that these games are something that we deserved and that we can actually prove a point with and say, oh, this guy will be the next so-and-so. But clearly, that's not the case. And the most recent Agiye Hall story is exactly how it's a perfect indicator as to how we get there from these spring games. So it's important that we enjoy the games that we have. But again, I urge you, please don't take them seriously. They're fun. They're exciting. They're entertaining, right? For maybe a half. And then you kind of get bored because the third and fourth stringers come out. They're entertaining. They're fun to bring the family out if you're local. But these games don't really matter a whole lot. And very rarely will a guy ever go out there, impress you, and actually live up to that hype unless, and if they do, outstanding. But just remember, these are not those moments where you're just going to see your next guy and he's going to stand out like that and that he's going to live off that hype for the next 4 years. In fact, more often than not, this Agiye Hall story that we're seeing right here, transferring away, wasting all of that talent, that's more than likely what we're going to see for the foreseeable future. So if you're a Georgia fan, if you're an Alabama fan, Arkansas, Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, hopefully you have some great talent on the field this coming Saturday. But again, don't buy all in if you see some guys make some ridiculous plays on Saturday. We'll see how it unfolds in the fall. But again, spring games, I wouldn't buy too much in. And that is the end of our show. Hopefully you enjoyed the ride we went on today. Again, William Byron just taking the reins right now in the NASCAR world. We'll see how he holds on to the lead here as far as the front runner for our NASCAR championship this year. I like Kyle Larson this coming Sunday. I don't know if he'll win, but I like him to win. I really also like the Tampa Bay Bandits to win the USFL championship, but I also kind of like the Birmingham Stallions. And I'm not really sure how that will unfold, but I think it'll be a great opportunity for us to get some football that actually means something, unlike the spring games that I just mentioned a few moments ago. Now, if you liked what I had to talk about today, I encourage you to check more of our content out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Radio Public, Breaker, YouTube at BWI Productions. Check us out on Instagram at Ball With Y'all Podcast. We are just about everywhere, and we are growing every single day, and that's all thanks to you, our loyal listeners. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and as always, I appreciate you allowing us the opportunity to talk some ball with y'all.